Netanyahu is leading the region into yet another war where civilians will pay the price.
I begin by saying Israel has the right absolutely to defend itself.
Should Canada come to the defense of a man already under an ICC arrest warrant for war crimes as he initiates a bombing campaign on a different place? I think there is a clear and obvious answer to the question, but in this video, I'm going to go over some of the reactions from Canadian politicians and what they're saying, which is just remarkable considering the circumstances. I'm also going to get to a couple of clips from the early 2000s that may give us an indication as to who we should be listening to now. So I'm going to first start with this clip from Friday. This was shortly after Israel launched their bombing campaign on Iran, completely unprovoked. And what the NDP were saying, this is Heather McPherson, compared to what the Liberal Party said in response.
Israel has bombed dozens of sites in Iran, including residential homes, causing hundreds of casualties, including children. Netanyahu is leading the region into yet another war where civilians will pay the price. Canadians with loved ones throughout the Middle East are terrified of what comes next. We need de-escalation, diplomacy, and rule of law. Will Canada condemn this latest escalation, finally commit to real nuclear disarmament, or will they stand with the Conservatives against international law?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I thank the honourable member for the question. However, I begin by saying Israel has the right absolutely to defend itself within the bounds of international law. At the very same time, we have a responsibility to de-escalate this situation.
Israel had just bombed Iran out of nowhere. The first response, Israel has the right to defend itself. They're the ones that started this. This response from a liberal is almost indistinguishable from Pierre Poilievre on Twitter here with his reaction. Again, keep in mind, this was before Iran even responded. Pierre Poilievre saying Israel has the right to defend itself, including by disarming Tehran's genocidal nuclear program. It's just like, it's so stupid. This, first of all, again, this was before there was a response. They're calling Israel has the right to defend itself when they're the ones doing the bombing. But in terms of the nuclear program, I'll get to this again later since it's part of my Netanyahu conversation. But since at least the early 90s, Netanyahu has been warning about Iran's going to have a nuclear weapon. And what? And now we're supposed to believe him now? After all this, now this time was for real. Weeks away. No, it was because the U.S. was working with Iran on an attempt to try to reach an agreement, which is absurd considering Trump, or I should say Obama, was already in an agreement with Iran, and then Trump came in his first term and ripped that up, and that's why we're all in the situation we're in now. If he had just stayed in that deal, we wouldn't be here. But that said, this whole attempt at trying to paint Iran as the bad guys here, when Israel were the ones that clearly escalated and are trying to start a war with Iran, it's just, seeing this kind of shit where it's so blatant and clear who's in the right, who's in the wrong, and you have this garbage sent out by our prime minister, which I guess you could argue a little better than Pierre Poilievre. Not by much here. Iran's nuclear program has long been a cause of grave concern, and its missile attacks across Israel threaten regional peace. Who started this? Who started this? Today, I convened our National Security Council to receive an update on the situation to ensure that all necessary steps will be taken to protect our nationals and our diplomatic missions in the region. Canada reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself. You know what? Maybe this is worse than Pierre Poilievre's. We call on all parties at this part. This was the part where it's like, if you're looking for anything, we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint. Oh, thank goodness. Move towards diplomatic resolution. Well, there we go. Finally, at the very end of the message, there's somewhat of acknowledgement that it's not just Israel, or it's not just Iran, but maybe Israel has some blame here. just wild. This gives you a clear-cut idea of where the Liberal Party currently is. This is Anita Anand. This is the Foreign Affairs Minister. When Israel attacks Iran, Canada is closely following the escalation of tensions between Israel and Iran. When Iran retaliates, Canada condemns Iran's attack on Israel and urges restraint on both sides. Further actions can cause devastating consequences for the broader region. Imagine Iran started it. Imagine they're the ones that out of nowhere bombed Israel. Do you think you would see this response? Canada is closely following the escalation of tensions between Israel. No, you would have seen this one, except this one came after Israel started the attacks. It's just so wild. And, I want to say disappointing. This is the larger post, by the way. I'll link to this below the video in case you want to read through all of this. But I wish I could say it's disappointing, but this is what the Liberal Party now is. When it comes to foreign policy, there are a lot of similarities with the Conservative Party. Now, here's a clip from ICC Arrest Warrant haver Benjamin Netanyahu and what he was saying today to ABC News. And then I'll get to a clip from a couple of decades ago and what he was saying in the run-up to the war with Iraq.
U.S. officials tell us that the president flatly rejected a plan, an opportunity that the Israelis had to take out the supreme leader. Do you understand his concern? My understanding is his concern is that this would escalate the conflict beyond where it is already.
It's not going to escalate the conflict. It's going to end the conflict. We've had half a century of conflict spread by this regime that terrorizes everyone in the Middle East, has bombed the Aramco oil fields in Saudi Arabia, is spreading terrorism and subversion and sabotage everywhere. That's the forever war is what Iran wants. And they're bringing us to the brink of nuclear war. In fact, what Israel is doing is preventing this, bringing an end to this aggression. And we can only do so by standing up to the forces of evil. Look, democracies have had to learn this lesson. They faced a tyrannical regime, a radical, fanatic regime. For 40 years, I've been saying, actually 3 years after the establishment of this radical Islamist Ayatollah regime in Tehran, I said that the greatest danger, not only to the survival of my country, but to the peace of the world, is Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons. And they are on the brink of achieving that. So imagine what they're doing now without nuclear weapons.
The fear-mongering is off the charts from the guy who initiated this entire thing. Yes, they're on the brink of these nuclear weapons. They're going to bomb us all. Just like in 92, 95, 2002, 2009, 2012, on and on and on. And this article is from 2015, so there's been a few more times since then. But that's just a taste of Netanyahu's bullshit. 4 years before that congressional speech in 92, then parliamentarian Netanyahu advised the Israeli Knesset that Iran was 3 to 5 years away from reaching nuclear weapon capability, and that this threat had to be uprooted by an international front headed by the U.S. He's been calling for a war with Iran since 1992. Nobody has taken him up on the offer, so he is trying right now to start it himself. Before I get to the clip from the early 2000s, this from Chris Hazard, MP, who is an MP in the UK. Useful info. Iran has 0 nuclear weapons. Israel has up to 500. Iran has signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel refused to. Iran has welcomed the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, the ones that would oversee any kind of deal. They've welcomed their observers to inspect its program. Israel has refused their oversight. Here's a clip from 2002, Netanyahu arguing for the Iraq War, which of course we all know was a complete disaster.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
Is that what happened? Is that what happened? Well, how about, because, it was so long ago, nobody knew back then that it was the wrong thing to do. Now, everyone thought the Iraq War was the right thing to do. Actually, let's go back to the Prime Minister of Canada back during this time, what he did. Because often you'll see articles, reminiscing. Maybe that's the wrong word. Reminiscing about the Iraq War. But like BBC here, Iraq War 20 years on, how invasion plunged the country into decades of chaos. You'll see images like this, where it's Tony Blair and George Bush. But interestingly, we don't see Jean Chrétien in any of these photos. I wonder why. So here he is being interviewed. More recently, this is a couple of years ago, on the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, reflecting why he decided not to join the US and the UK.
It was a great indication that we were a very independent nation, that we were not the 51st state of America, that too often some people think we were. And but I made a decision not for that. I made a decision because I thought that it was a big error to go to war in Iraq because there was no proof of weapon of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. And despite of the pressure from George W. and Tony Blair and the business community and so on, we decided that it was to be no.
Canada was not pulled in by the bullshit coming out of the US like the UK was. Canada listened to the United Nations, understood who was full of shit and who wasn't. So the Liberal Party of today would be wise to keep the Liberal Party of the past in mind as we move forward in this very tumultuous situation with the Middle East and the US. Do not capitulate to right-wing propaganda or conservative parties, like the Conservative Party back then was trying to do to the Liberals. This was a piece, 2003, from Stephen Harper, who went on to be Prime Minister later on, and Stockwell Day, Canadians stand with you. Today, the world is at war. A coalition of countries under the leadership of the UK and the US is leading a military intervention to disarm Saddam Hussein. Yet the Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, has left Canada outside this multilateral coalition of nations. This is a serious mistake. History has proven Jean Chrétien right, Stephen Harper and the Conservatives wrong. And today we are seeing a very similar attempt by Conservatives to try and pull Canada into more bullshit. Do not listen to this garbage. Ensure that your government, your MP, is aware that you do not support escalating anything with Iran, and that you also recognize that Netanyahu is a war criminal currently under an ICC arrest warrant, and to listen to the advice of a war criminal in his attempts to start another war with a different place would be absolutely insane.